The room smelled like old wood and fear. 40 men in expensive dark suits stood in a half circle, sweat running down their faces even though the air conditioning was on full blast. They were supposed to be the best in the world at opening locks. They had flown in from London, Paris, Berlin, and Rome. One guy had even cracked the security system at a Swiss bank last year. Stay with me because what's coming next will absolutely blow your mind. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, tomorrow I'm dropping another one you won't want to miss. Now let's dive back in. All of them had failed. In the middle of the room stood a massive steel door that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. It had been locked shut for 2 whole days. Inside that vault was 80 million euros in cash and a black leather book that contained every secret deal, every favor owed, and every threat made by the Lombardi crime family over the past 50 years. Without that book, the 5 rival gangs waiting in the shadows would attack before sunrise. The Lombardi Empire would collapse. Hundreds of people would die. Nino Lombardi stood facing the vault like a statue carved from stone. His dark hair had streaks of gray at the sides. His right arm was covered in detailed black tattoos that showed a knife wrapped in olive branches, a lion wearing a crown, and numbers that marked the exact location of his village back in Sicily. A thick gold ring sat on his pinky finger, catching the light every time his hand moved. He had 5 minutes left. After that, a fire system inside the vault would activate and melt everything in a liquid metal. His family's entire history would turn into slag. Nobody was breathing. Then a wine glass hit the floor and exploded into 1,000 pieces. Every head turned toward the sound. A waitress stood frozen near the door, her face white with panic. She wore a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up and a fitted black vest over it. Her dark brown hair was pulled back tight, except for a few loose pieces that framed her olive-skinned face. "Get her out of here!" Marco, the second-in-command, practically screamed. His face was red and blotchy. He had been watching foreign specialists touch Lombardi property for 2 days straight, and his pride was destroyed. "We don't need some clumsy." "Wait." Nino's voice cut through the chaos like a knife through butter. The waitress had dropped to her knees in the broken glass. But she wasn't just cleaning up the mess. She was staring at the vault door with her head tilted to one side, like she was listening to music nobody else could hear. Her lips were moving, counting something. Nino took 3 steps toward her. His bodyguards tensed up like springs about to snap. Everyone in that room knew the rule. You didn't walk up to Don Lombardi unless he called you over first. You definitely didn't stare at his secrets. But Franca Beneveni wasn't looking at the door itself. She was looking at something beyond it. In her mind, she was seeing the 3 rotating wheels on the lock as part of a bigger picture, the way her father had taught her to see the tiny gears inside the old clocks he used to fix. The markings around the edge of each wheel weren't just decorations. They were coordinates. Star coordinates. "It's not a code," she whispered, so quietly that only the people closest to her could hear. "It's a map." Nino's hand shot to his gold ring. It was a habit he had when he was doing math in his head, calculating whether someone was useful or dangerous. His dark eyes, which had sentenced dozens of men to death over the years, locked onto this thin woman kneeling in broken glass and wine. "You have 60 seconds to prove that," he said, his Sicilian accent getting thicker because of the stress. "Or I will make sure you disappear so completely that your mother will forget she ever gave birth to you." The room held its breath. The countdown timer on the wall showed 4:47 remaining. But to understand how Franca Beneveni ended up on her knees in front of Mafia vault with 60 seconds to save her life, you need to know what her life looked like 12 hours earlier. You need to know about the medical bills that were crushing her like a slow-moving avalanche. You need to know about her mother, who was dying one memory at a time. Franca's alarm went off at 4:30 in the morning. Not because she wanted to wake up at that horrible hour, but because she had to. She worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3 when she could find the extra shifts. The first job started at 6 in the morning at a cafe near the Naples harbor, where fishermen and dock workers came for coffee before their shifts. The second job was at the Palazzo Lombardi, where she served wine to men who wore watches worth more than her entire year's salary. She rolled out of her narrow bed in the tiny apartment she shared with her Aunt Rosa. The apartment had 2 rooms. One room was hers and her aunt's. The other room used to be her mother's, but now it sat empty because her mother, Sophia, lived in a hospice care facility across town. A facility that cost 1,200 euros per month. Money Franca didn't have. She splashed cold water on her face and stared at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. The dark circles under her eyes looked like bruises. She was 28 years old, but she felt 50. Her body hurt all the time now. Her feet ached from standing 12 to 14 hours a day. Her shoulders were tight from carrying heavy trays. Her hands had small burns from hot plates and cuts from broken glass. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the other kind of pain. The kind that came from watching her mother forget who she was. Franca got dressed in her cafe uniform, a simple black shirt and black pants, and grabbed her bag. Inside the bag was her second uniform for the Palazzo Lombardi, carefully folded so it wouldn't wrinkle. She also had a small notebook where she tracked every cent she earned and every cent she spent. On the first page of that notebook was a number written in red ink, 200,000. That was how much the experimental treatment in Switzerland cost. The treatment that could potentially save her mother's mind before it disappeared completely. On the next page was another number, this one in blue ink, 3,847. That was how much Franca had saved over 3 years of working herself to exhaustion. She would need to work for another 15 years at this pace to afford the treatment. Her mother didn't have 15 years. The doctor said she probably didn't have 15 months. Franca walked through the dark streets of Naples to the cafe. The city was just starting to wake up. Street cleaners pushed their carts. Delivery trucks rumbled past. A few early morning runners jogged along the waterfront. She liked this time of day because it was quiet. Nobody needed anything from her yet. Nobody was yelling at her to move faster or work harder. The cafe owner, Signor Russo, was already inside when she arrived. He was a kind man in his 60s with a thick gray mustache and hands that shook slightly from too much caffeine. He paid her 8 euros an hour, which wasn't much, but he let her take home leftover bread and pastries at the end of each shift. That saved her money on groceries. "Morning, Franca," he said, not looking up from the espresso machine he was cleaning. "Morning, Signor Russo. Your mother doing okay?" Franca's throat tightened. She hated this question because she never knew how to answer it honestly without crying. "She's stable," she said, which was the word the doctors used when they meant not getting better but not dead yet. Russo nodded and didn't push for more details. He understood. His own wife had died of cancer 5 years ago. He knew what it was like to watch someone you love slip away piece by piece. The morning shift at the cafe passed in a blur of espresso orders and breakfast sandwiches. Franca's hands moved on autopilot, pouring coffee and wiping down tables while her mind calculated numbers. If she picked up an extra shift on Sunday, that would be an additional 40 euros. If she skipped lunch for the rest of the month, she could save another 60 euros. If she walked to work instead of taking the bus, that was another 30 euros saved. Every euro mattered. Every single one brought her microscopically closer to that impossible number, 200,000. At 11 in the morning, her shift at the cafe ended. She changed into her Palazzo Lombardi uniform in the cafe's tiny bathroom, a white button-down shirt and fitted black vest that made her look professional and invisible at the same time. She pulled her dark hair back into a tight style that would stay put for the next 8 hours. She checked her reflection one more time and practiced her work smile, the one that said, "I'm here to serve you," without saying anything at all. The Palazzo Lombardi was a 40-minute bus ride from the cafe. Franca used that time to close her eyes and rest, even though she couldn't actually fall asleep on the bus. She had tried once and missed her stop, which made her late for work, which resulted in Signora Rossetti screaming at her for 10 minutes straight. Rossetti was the floor manager at the Palazzo, a woman whose face looked like it had forgotten how to smile sometime in 1987 and never remembered again. She treated the waitstaff like they were less than human, like they were robots that should work perfectly without breaks, without complaints, without needs. Franca walked through the back entrance of the palazzo and clocked in at exactly noon. Her shift didn't start until 12:30, but she always arrived early. Being early was safe. Being late was dangerous. The other servers were already there, getting ready for the lunch service. There was Tomas, who worked as a bartender and always smelled like expensive cologne he definitely couldn't afford on his salary, which meant he was probably stealing samples from the guests. There was old Lucia, who had been working at the palazzo for 20 years and had a bad knee that made her limp. There was young Giuseppe, newly hired and so nervous he dropped something at least twice per shift. Big event tonight, Tomas said to Franca as she filled a water pitcher. Some kind of family meeting? They've closed off the entire West Wing. Franca nodded, but didn't respond. She had learned not to gossip about the Lombardi family. The walls in places like this had ears. People who talked too much about the wrong things had a tendency to lose their jobs, or worse. The afternoon shift was busy. A private lunch party for 18 people who ordered the most expensive items on the menu and sent half of it back to the kitchen with complaints. Franca smiled through all of it. She apologized for things that weren't her fault. She brought new plates and refilled wine glasses and pretended she didn't hear when one of the guests made a crude joke about her appearance. At 3 o'clock, she finally got a 15-minute break. She sat in the staff room and ate a small container of leftover pasta she had brought from home. While she ate, she pulled out her phone and checked her bank account. The number hadn't magically increased since the last time she checked it that morning. Still 3,847 euros. Still nowhere close to 200,000. Her phone buzzed with a text message from the hospice facility. It was the same message they sent every week. Monthly payment of 1,200 euros is due by the end of the month. She had 12 days to come up with that money. She would make it barely, but it would wipe out almost everything she earned this month. The number in her savings account would drop back down. The impossible goal would get even more impossible. Franca put her phone away and finished her pasta. She didn't have time to feel sorry for herself. Self-pity didn't pay bills. At 6 in the evening, Signora Rossetti gathered all the servers for a pre-shift meeting. "Listen up," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Tonight is extremely important. The Lombardi family is hosting a private gathering. You will be professional. You will be invisible. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not ask questions. You will not make mistakes. Am I clear?" Everyone nodded. "Franca," Rossetti said, her eyes landing on her like a laser. "You're on the West Wing tonight. Table service for the private rooms." Franca's stomach dropped. The West Wing was where the family conducted their private business. The kind of business that regular staff members were never supposed to see or hear. Being assigned to the West Wing meant you were trusted, or it meant you were expendable. Franca wasn't sure which category she fell into. "Yes, Signora," she said, keeping her voice steady. The evening shift started at 7. Franca carried trays of expensive wine and plates of food into the private dining rooms where men in dark suits talked in low voices about things she tried very hard not to hear. She poured drinks and cleared plates and became invisible, just like Rossetti had ordered. But invisibility had its advantages. When you were invisible, people forgot you were there. They said things they wouldn't normally say in front of witnesses. They left important papers on tables. They had conversations about bank accounts and shipping routes and territory disputes. Franca didn't intentionally listen. She didn't want to know these things. But her brain couldn't help collecting information the way other people's lungs couldn't help breathing air. It was automatic. She heard a man mention a shipment arriving at Dock 7 on Thursday. She saw another man slide an envelope across the table that was thick with cash. She noticed the way Marco, the underboss, kept checking his phone with an expression that looked like he was expecting bad news. Something was wrong. The energy in the palazzo felt different tonight. Tense. Dangerous. Like everyone was waiting for something terrible to happen. At 9:30, chaos erupted near the entrance to the West Wing's restricted area. Giuseppe, the nervous new server, had dropped an entire tray of crystal champagne glasses. The sound was like an explosion. Glass shattered everywhere, glittering on the dark floor like diamonds. "You idiot," Rossetti's voice could probably be heard in Rome. She grabbed Giuseppe by his collar and shook him. "That's 8,000 euros in glassware. You're fired. Get out of my sight." Giuseppe practically ran out of the building, his face white with fear and shame. Rossetti's eyes scanned the room and landed on Franca. "Beneveni, get the industrial cleaner and the cut-proof gloves. Clean that mess up now. And for God's sake, be invisible." Franca's hands started shaking, but she hid it. She gathered her cleaning supplies and walked toward the restricted area. 2 bodyguards stood on either side of a heavy wooden door. One of them had a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. He looked at Franca the way you might look at an insect you were deciding whether to step on. "Clean. Fast. Eyes down," he said in a thick accent. "You see nothing. You hear nothing. Understand." "Understand," Franca whispered. The door opened, and Franca stepped into a room that would change her life forever. The first thing that hit her was the smell. Old wood mixed with something metallic and sharp, like the air before a thunderstorm. The second thing was the silence. 40 men in expensive suits stood completely still, not talking, barely breathing. Their faces were pale and covered in sweat, even though the room was cold enough to make Franca shiver. She kept her eyes down like the bodyguard had ordered and knelt beside the broken glass near the entrance. Her hands moved automatically, picking up the larger pieces and placing them carefully on her cleaning cloth. But as she worked, she couldn't help noticing the room itself. It was smaller than she expected, maybe 20 feet wide and 30 feet long. The walls were covered in dark wooden panels that looked like they had been there for 100 years. Paintings of old men in military uniforms hung in gold frames. A massive crystal light fixture hung from the ceiling, casting strange shadows across everything. But none of that mattered compared to what stood at the far end of the room. The vault. Franca had never seen anything like it. The door was made of steel, so thick it looked like it could survive a bomb blast. It was perfectly circular, maybe 8 feet across, with 3 large rotating wheels embedded in its surface. Each wheel had markings around the edge, symbols and numbers that seemed to glow under the light. Above the wheels was a small digital screen showing red numbers counting down. 452, 451, 450. A timer. Standing directly in front of the vault was a man who made everyone else in the room look small. He wasn't the tallest person there, maybe 6 feet and an inch or 2, but he had the kind of presence that filled up space. His dark hair had gray streaks at the temples. His jaw was tight. His right arm, visible because his suit jacket sleeve was pushed up slightly, was covered in detailed black tattoos that looked like they told a story. Nino Lombardi. Even though Franca had never seen him before, she knew exactly who he was. Everyone in Naples knew who he was. He was the kind of man whose name you didn't say out loud unless you had to. He stood perfectly still, staring at the vault like he could open it through willpower alone. A gold ring on his pinky finger caught the light every few seconds when his hand moved slightly. His other hand was in his pocket, but Franca could see from the shape that he was holding something. Probably a gun. Around him, the 40 specialists looked like they had given up. Some of them were sitting on the floor with their heads in their hands. Others were standing, but staring at nothing. One man near the back was quietly crying. These were supposed to be the best lock experts in Europe, and they had all failed. Near Nino stood another man with red, blotchy skin and eyes that looked mean. This had to be Marco, the underboss Tomas had warned her about. He was pacing back and forth like a caged animal, his hands opening and closing into fists. "This is a disaster," Marco was saying in a low, angry voice. "We flew these people in from everywhere. We paid them a fortune. And for what? Nothing. We're going to lose everything because of this cursed vault." "Shut up, Marco," Nino said without turning around. His voice was quiet, but it made Marco stop talking immediately. Franca kept cleaning, moving slowly toward the center of the room where most of the broken glass had scattered. She was trying to be invisible like Rossetti had ordered, but her eyes kept getting pulled back to the vault. Something about it was bothering her. Not the door itself, but the markings on those 3 rotating wheels. They looked familiar. As she got closer, she could see them more clearly. The outer wheel had 12 sections, each marked with a different symbol. a water jug, a fish, a ram, a bull. The middle wheel had numbers from 1 to 30. The inner wheel had 360 tiny marks around the edge, like degrees on a compass. Franca's heart started beating faster. She knew what this was. Her father had shown her something similar in one of his old books about navigation. This wasn't just a lock. It was an astrolabe, an ancient device sailors used to navigate by the stars. But why would someone put star navigation on a vault? For minutes, someone said from near the digital timer. His voice cracked with fear. Marco kicked a chair so hard it slammed into the wall. For minutes, until everything turns into melted metal. For minutes, until the 5 families attack us because they'll think we're weak. For minutes until... I said, "Shut up," Nino repeated, his voice getting harder. Franca's hands had stopped moving. She was kneeling in broken glass, but she didn't feel it. She was staring at the vault wheels, and her mind was racing through calculations. The outer wheel with its 12 symbols represented the zodiac constellations. The middle wheel was probably lunar cycles, 30 days. The inner wheel was directional, 360 degrees. This wasn't a random lock. Someone had designed it to point to a specific location in the night sky. But which location? And from where? Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Every clock tells you when, little mouse. But the stars tell you where. Sicily. The Lombardi family came from Sicily. Their ancestral home was in a village whose exact coordinates were supposedly tattooed on Nino's arm. What if the vault was locked to the star positions visible from that specific location on a specific date? But what date? Franca's eyes went to the paintings on the walls. Old men in military uniforms. One of them had a date written in small letters at the bottom of the frame. 1922. The year the Lombardi family officially started, according to the stories Tomas had told her. 1922, Sicily, the night sky from the Lombardi ancestral village. It was insane. It was impossible, but it made perfect sense. It's not a code, Franca whispered without thinking. It's a map. The words came out so quietly she thought nobody would hear them. But the room was so silent that even a whisper sounded loud. Every single head turned toward her. Franca's blood turned to ice. She had just broken the most important rule. She had stopped being invisible. What did you say? Marco's voice was like a whip crack. He took 3 steps toward her, his face twisted with rage. Did you just speak? Did this cleaning girl just open her mouth? Get her out of here, another man shouted. We don't need some clumsy waitress making noise while we're trying to... Wait. Nino's voice cut through the noise like a blade through paper. Everyone stopped talking immediately. He turned away from the vault for the first time since Franca had entered the room. His dark eyes locked onto her with an intensity that made her want to disappear into the floor. This was the gaze of a man who had sentenced people to death. A man who didn't make empty threats. He walked toward her slowly. Each footstep echoed in the silent room. The 40 specialists watched without moving. Marco's hand went to his jacket, probably reaching for a weapon. Nino stopped 3 feet away from where Franca was kneeling in the glass. Up close, he was even more terrifying. His face showed no emotion at all. His jaw was tight. The tattoos on his forearm seemed to move in the flickering light from the crystal fixture above. Stand up, he said. Franca's legs shook as she stood. She was still holding the cleaning cloth in her hands, stained with wine and blood from small cuts where the glass had gotten through her gloves. What's your name? Nino asked. Franca Beneveni, sir. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. You said something about a map. Explain. Franca's mind went completely blank with fear. She couldn't think. She couldn't breathe. This man could kill her with a single word to his bodyguards. She would disappear tonight and nobody would ever find her body. But then she thought about her mother, about the 200,000 euros she would never earn in time, about the experimental treatment in Switzerland that was slipping further away with every passing day, about working herself to death for the next 15 years and still coming up short. What did she have to lose? The wheels on the vault, she said, her voice getting slightly stronger. They're not a combination lock. They're star coordinates. Zodiac on the outer ring, lunar cycle in the middle, directional degrees on the inner ring. Someone designed it to match a specific view of the night sky. The room was so quiet Franca could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. You're saying the vault opens with star positions? Marco's voice dripped with sarcasm. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. We've had professional cryptographers looking at this for 2 days. We've had safe engineers who've cracked bank vaults. And you think you figured it out by looking at it for 30 seconds? But Nino wasn't looking at Marco. He was staring at Franca with an expression she couldn't read. His hand had gone to his gold ring, twisting it slightly. The timer on the wall now showed 4:15. Where? Nino asked. His Sicilian accent got thicker, a sign he was under massive stress. What Scott? Your village in Sicily, Franca said. The one marked on your arm. The night sky from that exact location. Probably on a date that matters to your family. Maybe 1922, and she stopped herself before saying more. Nino's eyes widened just a fraction. Nobody else in the room would have noticed, but Franca was good at reading tiny changes in people's faces. She had spent years as a waitress learning to predict what customers wanted before they asked. He knew she was right, but believing her and trusting her were two different things. Nino looked at the countdown timer. For 02, he looked back at Franca. Then he did something that shocked everyone in the room. He stepped aside, giving her a clear path to the vault. You have 60 seconds to prove what you just said, he told her, his voice dropping to something cold and final. If you open that vault, I will owe you a debt. But if you're wasting my time, if you're wrong, if you're playing some kind of game, I will make sure you disappear so completely that your mother will forget she ever gave birth to you. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Franca's hand started shaking so hard she almost dropped her cleaning cloth. Clock's ticking, Marco said with a cruel smile. Better move fast, waitress. Franca took a deep breath and walked toward the vault, past 40 men who had failed where she was about to try. Her entire life, everything she had ever worked for, every hope she had for her mother's treatment, all of it came down to the next 60 seconds. The countdown timer showed 3:47 when she reached the vault door and placed her hands on the first wheel. The metal was cold under her palms, colder than she expected. The wheel was heavy, designed to resist being turned easily. Franca could feel 40 pairs of eyes burning in her back. She could hear Marco breathing heavily behind her, probably hoping she would fail so he could watch Nino make good on his threat. She tried to push those thoughts away and focus. Her father had taught her that panic was the enemy of precision. When you worked with tiny clock gears, one shaky hand could ruin hours of work. The same principle applied here. She needed to be calm. She needed to think. The outer wheel had 12 sections, each marked with a zodiac symbol. Franca recognized them from the old astronomy books her father had kept on a shelf in their apartment. Aries the ram, Taurus the bull, Gemini the twins. She remembered him pointing at the night sky when she was little, teaching her the constellations. The stars are humanity's first clock, little mouse. They told us when to plant crops, when to sail, when to celebrate. But which constellation? She thought back to 1922. The Lombardi family legend said the patriarch had returned from America to Sicily in the summer of that year, bringing money and plans to build his empire. Summer in Sicily. That meant the sun would have been in a specific part of the zodiac. Cancer. The crab. June to July. Franca's fingers found the symbol for Cancer and stopped there. She didn't turn the wheel yet. She needed to figure out all 3 positions first, then align them together. That's how her father's more complex clocks worked. Everything had to move in harmony. What are you doing? Marco's voice came from behind her. The clock is running. Move. Let her think, Nino said quietly. The authority in his voice made Marco go silent again. 3:19 remaining. Franca moved to the middle wheel. This one had numbers from 1 to 30, representing the lunar cycle. A complete moon cycle took about 29.5 days, which ancient people had rounded to 30 for simplicity. But which day of the cycle? She thought about the story again. The patriarch had returned in summer, and according to the tales old Lucia had told during breaks, he had arrived during a festival. Sicily had many festivals, but the biggest summer celebration was the Feast of Santa Rosalia in Palermo. That happened in mid-July. Mid-July meant the moon would have been waning, past full, probably around day 22 or 23 of the cycle. Franca's fingers hovered over the numbers. She had a guess. There was no way to know the exact day without looking up historical moon charts, and she definitely didn't have time for that. She chose 23. It felt right, though she couldn't explain why. 251 remaining. The inner wheel was the hardest part. It had 360 tiny marks around the edge, each one representing a single degree of direction. This will determine which part of the sky you were looking at. North, south, east, west, or anywhere in between. Franca closed her eyes and tried to picture Sicily. The Lombardy ancestral village was on the eastern coast of the island, facing the sea. She knew this because Tomas had once mentioned that the family crest showed a lion looking east toward the rising sun. If someone stood in that village and looked up at the night sky during the feast of Santa Rosalia, which direction would they face to see Cancer rising? East, toward the water, toward the sunrise, but not due east. Cancer would rise slightly to the north of true east during summer, maybe 75 degrees, 80 degrees, 228 remaining. Franca's hands were shaking now. She could feel sweat running down her back despite the cold air. This was it. She had made her choices. Cancer for the zodiac, 23 for the lunar day, and she would go with 78 degrees for the direction, splitting the difference in her estimate. She's guessing, Marco said, his voice full of disgust. Look at her. She has no idea what she's doing. We're going to die because Nino listened to a waitress. 30 more seconds, Nino said, speaking to Franca, not Marco. Then we'll know. Franca grabbed the outer wheel with both hands and turned it. The metal groaned, fighting her. It hadn't been moved in years, maybe decades. She put her full body weight into it, her feet sliding slightly on the floor. Finally, the wheel began to rotate. She lined up the Cancer symbol with a small arrow mark at the top of the vault door. 203 remaining. She moved to the middle wheel and turned it to 23. This one moved more easily, clicking softly with each number it passed. When she reached 23, she heard a deeper click from somewhere inside the vault wall. That was good. That meant something was aligning correctly. 147 remaining. The inner wheel was the most delicate. Each degree mark was so small she had to count carefully to make sure she didn't overshoot. She turned it slowly, watching the tiny notches pass under her finger. 70 degrees. 72. 75. 78. Another click from inside the wall, louder this time. But nothing else happened. The vault door didn't open. The timer kept counting down. 131 remaining. It's not working, someone whispered from behind her. Franca's mind raced. What had she missed? The positions were right. She was sure of it. The clicks confirmed that something inside was aligning properly. But the door still wasn't opening. Then she remembered something her father had told her about really old locks. The smartest designs require action in a specific order, little mouse. Like a combination on a safe. First this, then that, then the other thing. She had set all three wheels, but maybe she needed to turn them in a sequence. Not all at once, but one after another in the right order. The question was which order? 109 remaining. She thought about how sailors used astrolabes for navigation. First, you found your constellation. Then you calculated the moon phase for the date. Finally, you determined your directional bearing. It was a process that built on itself, each step depending on the one before. That had to be it. Franca quickly reset all three wheels to their starting positions. The timer now showed 0:54. What is she doing? Marco shouted. She's starting over? We don't have time for this. Franca blocked out his voice. She turned the outer wheel to Cancer. Click. Then she turned the middle wheel to 23 while keeping the outer wheel in position. A louder click echoed from deep inside the vault. Finally, she turned the inner wheel to 78 degrees while holding the other two steady. The loudest click yet rumbled through the entire door, like thunder rolling through metal. 0:37 remaining. But still nothing happened. The door remained sealed. Franca wanted to scream. She had been so sure. The theory was right. The positions were correct. The sequence made sense. What was she missing? Then Nino spoke, his voice cutting through her panic. In the old days, after you set the stars, you had to release the mechanism. There's always a final step. Release the mechanism. Of course. Franca looked at the center of the vault door. Between the three wheels was a large handle, shaped like a ship's wheel. She had barely noticed it before because it was black metal that blended into the door. Her hands grabbed the handle and she pulled. Nothing. She tried pushing instead. Still nothing. 0:22 remaining. Sweat poured down her face. Her heart was hammering so hard it hurt. Behind her, she could hear people backing away from the vault, probably preparing for the thermite charge to activate and spray molten metal everywhere. Turn it. The thought came from nowhere. The handle wasn't meant to be pulled or pushed. It was meant to be rotated like opening a jar lid. Franca grabbed the handle with both hands and twisted clockwise. At first, it didn't move. Then, slowly, grudgingly, it began to turn. She could feel massive gears shifting inside the door, mechanisms that had been frozen in place for who knows how long finally coming back to life. 0:14 remaining. She kept turning the handle. Her arms burned with effort. The metal was so stiff it felt like trying to turn a car's steering wheel with the engine off. 0:09 remaining. A deep grinding sound came from inside the vault. Not the click of gears aligning, but the sound of heavy bolts retracting. The kind of bolts that were as thick as her wrist, designed to hold back an army. 0:06 remaining. The handle completed a full rotation and locked into place with a final definitive click that echoed through the room like a gunshot. For one horrible second, nothing happened. Then the massive steel door groaned like a living thing waking up from a century of sleep. It swung outward on hinges that shrieked from disuse, moving slowly but steadily. Fresh air that had been sealed inside for 2 days rushed out, carrying the smell of old paper and metal. The vault was open. The timer froze at 0:04. 4 seconds to spare. Franca stumbled backward, her legs giving out. She sat down hard on the floor, her whole body shaking. She had done it. Somehow, impossibly, she had opened a lock that 40 experts couldn't crack. The room exploded with noise. People were shouting, some in relief, others in disbelief. Several of the specialists rushed forward to examine the door, talking rapidly in different languages. Marco stood frozen with his mouth hanging open, looking like someone had hit him in the head with a brick. But Franca only noticed one person. Nino Lombardi was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. It wasn't anger. It wasn't relief. It was something else. Something calculating and intense, like he was seeing her for the first time as an actual person instead of just another invisible servant. He walked to the vault and looked inside. Franca couldn't see what was in there from her position on the floor, but she saw Nino's shoulders relax slightly. Whatever he needed was still intact. Then he turned back to her and did something that made everyone in the room go silent. He walked over and extended his hand to help her up. Franca Beneveni, he said quietly, pulling her to her feet. It seems I owe you a debt. Those words, spoken in front of 40 witnesses, changed everything. Franca's life as an invisible waitress had just ended. What came next, she couldn't even begin to imagine. Nino still held her hand, not shaking it, just holding it in a grip that was firm but not painful. His dark eyes studied her face like he was trying to read a book written in a language he was just learning. The room full of specialists and bodyguards watched in complete silence. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Everyone out, Nino said without looking away from Franca. Except Marco. You stay. The 40 specialists didn't need to be told twice. They filed out of the room quickly, some of them glancing back at Franca with expressions that mixed respect and fear. The heavy door closed behind them with a soft thud, leaving only 3 people in the vault room. Nino finally released Franca's hand and took a step back. Sit, he said, pointing to one of the chairs that Marco had kicked earlier. It was lying on its side. Marco picked it up and set it upright, his movements stiff and angry. Franca sat. Her legs were still shaking from the adrenaline crash. Her hands had small cuts from the broken glass that were starting to sting now that the fear was wearing off. Nino pulled another chair over and sat facing her, close enough that their knees almost touched. This was not a comfortable distance. This was an interrogation distance. Marco stood behind Nino with his arms crossed, his face still red and blotchy. "Tell me how you knew," Nino said, not asking, commanding. Franca's throat was dry. "My father was a clockmaker. He taught me about gears and mechanisms. He also loved astronomy. He had books about how sailors used to navigate by the stars before GPS existed. When I saw the symbols on the vault wheels, I recognized them from his books. The zodiac, the lunar cycle, the directional degrees. It all matched the design of an astrolabe. And you just guessed it would be set to my village in Sicily?" Marco interrupted, his voice dripping with suspicion. "How convenient. Maybe you knew about the vault before tonight. Maybe someone told you how it worked." "Nobody told me anything," Franca said, meeting his eyes even though it made her stomach twist with fear. "I made an educated guess based on the paintings in this room showing 1922 and the fact that everyone knows the Lombardi family comes from Sicily. The rest was just logic and luck." "Logic and luck," Marco repeated with a bitter laugh. 40 professionals couldn't open that vault in 2 days. But a waitress does it in under 4 minutes with logic and luck. "Marco," Nino said quietly. Just his name, nothing else. But it made Marco go silent immediately. Nino leaned forward slightly. "You saved my empire tonight, Franca Beneveni. That vault contains financial records that prove which politicians we own, which police officers work for us, and which business deals are legitimate versus which ones are not. Without those records, the 5 rival families would have attacked us tomorrow. They've been waiting for any sign of weakness. A sealed vault we couldn't open would have been exactly that sign." He paused and pulled out his phone. His fingers moved quickly across the screen, typing something. "You also saved the liquid assets inside. 80 million euros in cash that we need for operations over the next 6 months. And most importantly, you saved something that can't be measured in money. You saved my family's honor. We don't fail. We don't show weakness. And we don't leave our most important secrets locked away where we can't reach them." He put his phone back in his pocket and looked at her with that same calculating expression. "So now I owe you a debt. In my world, debts are serious business. They must be repaid. Tell me what you want." Franca's mind went blank. What did she want? The question was so big it didn't make sense. She wanted her mother to get better. She wanted to stop working 3 jobs. She wanted to sleep for more than 4 hours a night. She wanted a life that didn't feel like drowning slowly. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Then let me tell you what I think you want," Nino said. "You work 2 jobs, maybe 3. You're exhausted all the time. You have someone who depends on you, someone who needs expensive medical care you can't afford. I can see it in your eyes. That look of someone who's trying to save a person they love and failing." Franca felt tears threatening to form. She blinked them back hard. She would not cry in front of these men. "My mother has dementia. Early onset. There's a treatment in Switzerland that might help her, but it costs 200,000 euros. I've saved less than 4,000 in 3 years." Nino nodded slowly, like this confirmed something he already suspected. "And at your current pace, you'll never earn enough in time." "No," Franca admitted. "I won't." "Then here's what I propose," Nino said. He stood up and walked to the vault. Inside, Franca could now see stacks of money bundled with paper bands, along with file cabinets and a large leather book that looked ancient. Nino pulled out one of the money stacks and came back. He sat on her lap. It was heavy. The paper band around it said 10,000 euros. "That's a start," Nino said. "Consider it a thank you gift. But I'm going to offer you something much bigger." He pulled his phone out again and made a call. Someone answered immediately. "Transfer 200,000 euros to..." He looked at Franca. "What's the name of the facility in Switzerland?" Franca's heart stopped. "What? The facility. The one with the treatment for your mother." Her voice came out as a whisper. "The Klinik Hirslanden. In Zurich." Nino repeated the name into the phone. "Transfer the money today. Make sure it's marked for a patient named." He raised his eyebrows at Franca. "Sofia Beneveni," she said. Her hand was shaking so hard the bundle of cash almost fell off her lap. "Sofia Beneveni," Nino said into the phone. "I want confirmation within the hour." He ended the call and put the phone away. Franca couldn't process what was happening. 200,000 euros. The full amount. Just like that. Years of impossible work, years of crushing debt, Years of watching her mother fade away, all of it solved with a single phone call. "I don't understand," she said. "Why would you do this?" "Because I owe you a debt," Nino said simply. "And because I want something from you in return." There was the catch. Nothing in life was free, especially not for men like Nino Lombardi. "What do you want?" Franca asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I want you to work for me," Nino said. "Not as a waitress, as my personal assistant and strategic advisor. What you did tonight, seeing patterns that 40 experts missed, that's a rare skill. I need someone who can look at problems from angles other people don't see. Someone who understands systems and mechanisms. Someone smart enough to solve puzzles that seem impossible." Marco made a sound like he was choking. "You can't be serious. She's a waitress. She has no experience in our world. She doesn't know anything about our business. She knows how to think," Nino said, still looking at Franca. "That's more valuable than experience. Experience can be taught. Intelligence can't." Franca's mind was racing. Work for a crime boss. Leave her normal life behind. Enter a world where people solve problems with violence instead of conversation. It was dangerous. It was probably illegal. It went against everything her father had taught her about staying safe by staying invisible. But her mother would get treatment. Real treatment. The kind that might actually work. "What would this job involve?" she asked carefully. "Analysis. Problem solving. You'd look at our operations and find weaknesses before our enemies do. You'd help me make strategic decisions about territory, alliances, and business deals. You'd be present at important meetings, but mostly as an observer. You'd give me your honest assessment of people and situations. Think of it like being a consultant, except instead of corporate clients, you'd be working with the Lombardi family. And if I say no," Nino smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes, "then I'll still pay for your mother's treatment because I owe you that debt. You can go back to your 2 jobs and your normal life. But Franca, be honest with yourself. You opened that vault because you have a gift for seeing patterns and solving complex problems. Do you really want to spend the rest of your life carrying trays and cleaning tables when you could be using your mind for something bigger?" It was a good argument, a manipulative argument, but still good. "How much would you pay me?" Franca asked. €5,000 per month to start, plus housing. I'll move you into a secure apartment near the Palazzo, so you're available when I need you. Your aunt can come too if she wants. And I'll cover all of your mother's ongoing medical expenses, not just the initial treatment. €5,000 per month. That was more than she currently made in 3 months of working herself to exhaustion. "There's one condition," Nino continued. "You leave your old life completely. You quit both your jobs today. You cut contact with everyone except your immediate family. What you see and hear working for me must stay absolutely secret. If you betray that trust, the consequences will be severe. Not just for you, but for everyone you care about." There was the threat, hidden inside the generous offer like a knife wrapped in silk. Franca looked down at the bundle of cash in her lap. €10,000. More money than she usually saw in 6 months. And Nino was offering her 20 times that amount, paid regularly, plus her mother's full treatment costs. All she had to do was step into a world of organized crime and hope she didn't get killed. She thought about her mother lying in that hospice bed, forgetting a little more of herself every day. She thought about the doctors in Switzerland who might be able to bring her back. She thought about actually having enough money to breathe without the constant crushing weight of debt. "I need to visit my mother first," Franca said. "Before I give you my answer, I need to tell her what's happening." Nino checked his watch. "It's almost midnight. Visiting hours are over." "I don't care about visiting hours. I need to see her." Something shifted in Nino's expression. Not quite respect, but something close to it. "Marco, have Luca drive Miss Beneveni to the hospice facility. Wait for her and bring her back here when she's done." Marco looked like he wanted to argue, but he just nodded stiffly. "You have 1 hour," Nino told Franca. "Think carefully about my offer. When you come back, I need your answer. Yes or no? If it's yes, your new life starts tonight." Franca stood up on shaky legs. She still held the bundle of cash. "Can I keep this? Even if I say no?" "It's yours regardless," Nino said. "I don't take back gifts." Franca nodded and followed Marco out of the vault room. Her mind was spinning so fast she felt dizzy. 1 hour to make a decision that would change everything. 1 hour to choose between safety and opportunity. 1 hour to decide if she was brave enough or desperate enough to step into the darkness. Franca sat in the back of a black Mercedes as Marco's driver, Luca, navigated through the empty Naples streets toward the hospice facility. She clutched the bundle of 10,000 euros against her chest like it might disappear if she let go. The car smelled like leather and expensive cologne. The seats were more comfortable than her bed at home. Marco sat in the front passenger seat, silent and radiating hostility. He hadn't said a single word to her since they left the palazzo. Every few minutes, he would glance back at her in the rearview mirror with an expression that made it clear he thought Nino was making a huge mistake. The hospice facility looked small and sad under the streetlights. It was a converted apartment building painted pale yellow with bars on the windows. Not because patients tried to escape, but because the neighborhood wasn't safe. Franca had chosen this place because it was the only one she could afford on her salary. The nicer facilities cost 3 times as much. 20 minutes, Marco said as Luca pulled up to the entrance. Then we're leaving with or without you. Franca didn't bother responding. She got out of the car and walked to the front door. The night nurse, Valentina, looked up from her desk with surprise when Franca walked in. Visiting hours ended 4 hours ago, Valentina said, but her voice wasn't harsh. She liked Franca because Franca always remembered to thank her and sometimes brought her coffee. I know. I'm sorry, but I really need to see my mother. Just for a few minutes. Please. Valentina sighed and waved her through. Room 14. But keep it quiet. Don't wake the others. Franca walked down the narrow hallway past closed doors. She could hear someone coughing in one room, someone crying softly in another. This place was where people came to fade away slowly. It broke her heart every single time she visited. Room 14 was at the end of the hall. Franca pushed open the door quietly. A small lamp on the bedside table cast a weak yellow glow across the room. Her mother lay in the hospital bed, eyes closed, breathing steadily. She looked so small under the thin blanket, so fragile. Mama, Franca whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed. Sophia's eyes opened slowly. For a moment, they were blank and confused. Then recognition flickered across her face like a candle being lit. Franca? Is it morning already? No, Mama. It's nighttime. I just wanted to see you. Sophia reached out and touched Franca's face with trembling fingers. You look tired, little mouse. Are you eating enough? Franca's throat tightened. Her mother had called her little mouse, just like her father used to. That meant she was having a good moment, a clear moment when the fog lifted and she was truly herself again. I'm eating fine, Mama. Listen, I have good news. Franca took her mother's hand gently. I found a way to get you into that treatment program in Switzerland. The good one. The one that might help you remember things better. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. That's too expensive. We can't afford it. We can now. I got help from someone. A wealthy person who owed me a favor. It wasn't exactly a lie. Franca, what did you do? Sophia's voice sharpened with worry. Did you borrow money from dangerous people? Did you make a deal you shouldn't have made? Even through the dementia, even through the confusion, her mother could still read her like a book. I might have to change jobs, Franca admitted. Work for this person doing analytical work. But Mama, it pays well. Really well. And they're covering all your medical expenses, not just the treatment. Sophia stared at her for a long moment. Then she said something that surprised Franca. Your father would want you to use your brain for something important. He always said you were wasting your gifts carrying trays. He would want you to be more than invisible. But what if it's dangerous? Franca whispered. Living is dangerous, Sophia said. Her voice was getting weaker, the fog starting to roll back in. Being poor is dangerous. Working yourself to death is dangerous. At least if you're going to take risks, take them for something that matters. Mama, promise me something. Sophia's grip on her hand tightened. Promise me that whatever you do, you'll stay smart. Don't let anyone make you into something you're not. Use your mind, but don't lose your heart. I promise, Franca said, tears running down her face now. Sophia's eyes were already closing again, drifting back into sleep. "Love you, little mouse," she murmured. "Love you too, Mama." Franca sat there for another few minutes, holding her mother's hand and memorizing her face. Then she stood up, wiped her tears, and walked back out to the car where Marco and Luca were waiting. "So," Marco asked as she got in, "what's your answer?" Franca took a deep breath. "Yes, I'll do it." Marco's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. He just nodded at Luca, who started driving back toward the palazzo. When they arrived, Nino was waiting in a different room, smaller and more private than the vault room. It had a large wooden table covered with papers, ledgers, and laptop computers. He was standing by the window, looking out at the city lights. "I accept your offer," Franca said from the doorway. Nino turned around and studied her face. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him because he nodded once. "Good. Then we start immediately. Your first test begins now." He walked to the table and picked up a thick stack of papers held together with metal clips. "This is a shipping manifest from our operation at the Port of Naples. It lists every container that came through our terminals last month, what was inside each container, and how much it weighed." He dropped the stack in front of her. It had to be at least 200 pages. "Our accountant says the numbers match up perfectly," Nino continued. "Everything balances, but I have a feeling something is wrong. Call it instinct. I think someone is stealing from me, hiding it inside these shipments. The problem is I don't know who or how much." Franca looked at the massive pile of papers. "You want me to find the theft?" "I want you to find a discrepancy," Nino corrected. "Any difference between what should be there and what is actually there. Even a small one. Even a percentage point or two." "Why do you think there's a discrepancy at all?" Franca asked. "Because Vittorio, the dock manager, just bought his daughter a new car. A BMW. He makes 40,000 euros a year. That car costs 60,000. Nino's voice was cold. "Either he's very good at saving money, or he's very good at skimming for my shipments." Marco snorted from where he stood near the door. "This is impossible. There are thousands of entries in that manifest, each one with different weights, different values, different calculations. It would take a team of accountants a week to go through it all properly." "Then it's lucky I'm not asking a team of accountants," Nino said, looking at Franca. "I'm asking someone who sees patterns." Franca sat down at the table and pulled the stack toward her. Her hands were still shaking slightly, but not from fear anymore, from adrenaline. This was a puzzle, a real puzzle with stakes that mattered. "How long do I have?" she asked. "The sun rises in 6 hours," Nino said. "I need an answer before dawn. If you can't find anything by then, we'll assume I was wrong and move on." 6 hours to analyze 200 pages of shipping data and find a theft that might not even exist. It was crazy. It was impossible. But she had opened a vault that 40 experts couldn't crack, hadn't she? "I'll need coffee," Franca said. "Strong coffee. And a calculator. And paper to write notes." Nino smiled, a real smile this time. "Marco, get her what she needs." Marco looked like he wanted to protest, but he left the room without arguing. Franca started reading. The first few pages were overwhelming. Container numbers, weight measurements in kilograms, value estimates in euros. Ship names, arrival dates, customs codes. Her eyes started to blur after just 10 minutes. Then she remembered what her father had taught her. When a mechanism looks too complicated, break it down into smaller pieces. Don't try to understand the whole clock at once. Start with one gear. She began organizing the data differently. She ignored the container numbers and ship names. Those were distractions. She focused only on 3 things: weight, value, and percentage. Every shipment had a declared value based on what was inside. That value should have a predictable relationship to the weight. Expensive electronics weighed less, but were worth more. Cheap textiles weighed more, but were worth less. If you plotted weight against value, you should see a consistent pattern with some natural variation, unless someone was lying about what was in the containers. Franca started making graphs by hand on the paper Marco had brought her. She plotted weight on one side and value on the other. Each dot represented one shipment. Most of them fell into a predictable band, but about 20 dots were slightly off. Not by much. Maybe 2 or 3% higher value for their weight than they should be. 2%. That was the magic number. She checked those 20 containers more carefully. They all had one thing in common. They were all processed through Dock 7. And who was the manager of Dock 7? Vittorio. Her heart started beating faster. She was onto something. She did more calculations. If Vittorio was shaving 2% off the top of each high-value shipment, marking the containers as containing cheaper goods while actually hiding expensive items, then over a month that would add up to roughly 120,000 euros in stolen merchandise. More than enough to buy a BMW. Franca checked her numbers 3 more times to make sure she wasn't making a mistake. Each time, the pattern held. 2%, 20 containers. Dock 7. Vittorio. She looked at the window. The sky was starting to turn from black to dark blue. Dawn was maybe an hour away. I found it, she said. Nino, who had been sitting quietly in the corner reading something on his phone, looked up immediately. Show me. Franca spread out her hand-drawn graphs and explained her analysis. She showed him the 20 suspicious containers. She showed him the 2% pattern. She showed him how it all traced back to Vittorio. Nino studied her work in silence for several minutes. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. Check the manifest for containers 4427, 4439, and 4451, he said to whoever answered. Open them. Tell me what's actually inside versus what the paperwork claims. He waited. Franca waited. Marco waited. 5 minutes later, the phone rang. Nino answered, listened, and then hung up without saying anything. He looked at Franca with an expression that mixed respect and something else. Something almost like pride. Container 4427 was listed as containing cheap clothing worth 5,000 euros, he said. It actually contains designer handbags worth 40,000. You were right. Vittorio has been stealing from me for months. What are you going to do to him? Franca asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. That's not your concern, Nino said. Your concern is that you just passed your first test. He walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. Welcome to the family business, Franca Beneveni. You're officially my shadow strategist now. Franca looked down at her graphs and numbers, at the evidence of theft she had uncovered in 6 hours using nothing but pattern recognition and logic. Her old life was definitely over. Her new life had just begun, and she had no idea where it would lead. 3 weeks passed in a blur of numbers, meetings, and sleepless nights. Franca moved into a secure apartment 2 blocks from the Palazzo, a place with actual hot water and windows that locked properly. Her Aunt Rosa came to visit once and cried when she saw the kitchen, which was bigger than their entire old apartment. Nino kept his promise about her mother too. Sophia was now in Zurich, starting the experimental treatment that was already showing small improvements. She had recognized Franca on their last video call and remembered what they had talked about the day before. Franca's new job turned out to be exactly what Nino had described. She analyzed shipping routes, studied financial records, and sat quietly in meetings where dangerous men discussed territories like they were playing a board game. She found 3 more cases of theft, predicted which neighborhoods would be profitable for expansion, and caught an accountant who was cooking the books. Nino started calling her the calculator because of how fast she could do mental math. Marco started calling her the lucky waitress because he still refused to believe she belonged there. Then came the invitation that changed everything. We're going to Milan, Nino announced one morning while Franca was reviewing import taxes at the Palazzo's main office. He dropped a cream-colored envelope on her desk. The paper felt expensive, the kind that was thick and textured. The Rossini Foundation is hosting their annual charity gala. All 5 families will be there. It's neutral ground. No violence allowed. Just talking, networking, and showing off. Franca opened the envelope. The invitation was printed in gold letters that caught the light. Why are we going? Because attending shows strength. Not attending shows fear. Nino sat on the edge of her desk. Also, I need you there as my advisor. You'll observe people, watch for suspicious behavior, and tell me what you see. I don't know anything about galas, Franca said. I serve food at them. I never attended one. Then it's time you learned. Nino pulled out his phone and made a call. Lucia, I need you to take Franca shopping today. She needs a proper dress for the Milan event. Spare no expense. I want her to look like she belongs in that room. 3 hours later, Franca found herself in an expensive boutique in downtown Naples with Lucia, who turned out to be not the old limping server from the palazzo, but Nino's sister. She was in her late 30s with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue. "You're too thin," Lucia said, walking around Franca like a predator circling prey. "We need something that gives you shape. And your posture is terrible. You stand like a waitress. You need to stand like someone who has power." They tried on 12 dresses. Most of them made Franca look like she was playing dress-up in her mother's closet. Too big, too flashy, too obviously expensive in a way that screamed, "I don't belong here." Then the boutique owner brought out a dress in deep emerald green silk. It was simpler than the others, with clean lines and long sleeves. When Franca put it on, something shifted. She looked elegant, professional, like someone who could walk into a room full of dangerous people and hold her own. "That's the one," Lucia said with satisfaction. "Now for shoes and jewelry." The shoes were black heels that hurt Franca's feet after 10 minutes. The jewelry was minimal, just simple gold earrings and a delicate gold necklace. But Lucia insisted on one more thing. "You'll wear your silver wristwatch," she said. "The one you always have on. It's simple and practical. It says you're there to work, not to party." Franca touched the watch her father had given her for her 16th birthday. She never took it off. Won't it look cheap compared to everything else? "It looks real," Lucia corrected. "In a room full of people wearing fake smiles and false loyalty, real is valuable." The gala was held in a converted opera house in Milan, a building so beautiful it made Franca's chest hurt. The walls were covered in gold decorations and paintings of angels. Crystal lights the size of cars hung from the ceiling. The marble floor was so polished she could see her reflection in it. Franca walked in beside Nino, who wore a perfectly tailored dark suit and looked like he had been born for events like this. Marco walked behind them with 2 bodyguards, his face set in a permanent scowl. He had made his opinion very clear during the car ride up. Bringing Franca to this event was a mistake. She would embarrass them. She would say something stupid. She would prove she was just a waitress playing pretend. The main hall was filled with at least 200 people, all of them dressed in expensive clothes and fake jewelry. Well, probably not all fake. Some of it was definitely real. Franca saw one woman wearing a diamond necklace that could probably pay for her mother's treatment 3 times over. "Stay close," Nino said quietly. "Watch everyone, especially Marco." "Marco?" Franca repeated, confused. "Why Marco?" "Because I think he's planning something," Nino said. "He's been too quiet lately, too cooperative. When Marco stops fighting me, it means he's scheming." Before Franca could ask more questions, people started approaching Nino to shake hands and exchange pleasantries that sounded friendly but felt like threats wrapped in silk. Franca stood slightly behind him and to the left, exactly where Lucia had told her to stand. Close enough to be included, but far enough to be dismissed. She watched faces. She watched body language. She noticed who avoided eye contact with Nino and who held it too long. She saw a man in a gray suit whisper something to his companion while looking at Nino. Then both of them laughed. Not a friendly laugh. Franca spread out her hand-drawn graphs and explained her analysis. She showed him the 20 suspicious containers. She showed him the 2% pattern. She showed him how it all traced back to Vittorio. Nino studied her work in silence for several minutes. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. "Check the manifest for containers 4427, 4439, and 4451, he said to whoever answered. "Open them. Tell me what's actually inside versus what the paperwork claims." He waited. Franca waited. Marco waited. 5 minutes later, the phone rang. Nino answered, listened, and then hung up without saying anything. He looked at Franca with an expression that mixed respect and something else. Something almost like pride. Container 4427 was listed as containing cheap clothing worth 5,000 euros, he said. "It actually contains designer handbags worth 40,000. You were right. Vittorio has been stealing from me for months. What are you going to do to him?" Franca asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. "That's not your concern," Nino said. "Your concern is that you just passed your first test." He walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Welcome to the family business, Franca Beneveni. You're officially my shadow strategist now. Franca looked down at her graphs and numbers, at the evidence of theft she had uncovered in 6 hours using nothing but pattern recognition and logic. Her old life was definitely over. Her new life had just begun, and she had no idea where it would lead. 3 weeks passed in a blur of numbers, meetings, and sleepless nights. Franca moved into a secure apartment 2 blocks from the Palazzo, a place with actual hot water and windows that locked properly. Her Aunt Rosa came to visit once and cried when she saw the kitchen, which was bigger than their entire old apartment. Nino kept his promise about her mother too. Sophia was now in Zurich, starting the experimental treatment that was already showing small improvements. She had recognized Franca on their last video call and remembered what they had talked about the day before. Franca's new job turned out to be exactly what Nino had described. She analyzed shipping routes, studied financial records, and sat quietly in meetings where dangerous men discussed territories like they were playing a board game. She found 3 more cases of theft, predicted which neighborhoods will be profitable for expansion, and caught an accountant who was cooking the books. Nino started calling her the calculator because of how fast she could do mental math. Marco started calling her the lucky waitress because he still refused to believe she belonged there. Then came the invitation that changed everything. We're going to Milan, Nino announced one morning while Franca was reviewing import taxes at the Palazzo's main office. He dropped a cream-colored envelope on her desk. The paper felt expensive, the kind that was thick and textured. The Rossini Foundation is hosting their annual charity gala. All 5 families will be there. It's neutral ground. No violence allowed. Just talking, networking, and showing off. Franca opened the envelope. The invitation was printed in gold letters that caught the light. Why are we going? Because attending shows strength. Not attending shows fear. Nino sat on the edge of her desk. Also, I need you there as my advisor. You'll observe people, watch for suspicious behavior, and tell me what you see. I don't know anything about galas, Franca said. I serve food at them. I never attended one. Then it's time you learned. Nino pulled out his phone and made a call. Lucia, I need you to take Franca shopping today. She needs a proper dress for the Milan event. Spare no expense. I want her to look like she belongs in that room. 3 hours later, Franca found herself in an expensive boutique in downtown Naples with Lucia, who turned out to be not the old limping server from the Palazzo, but Nino's sister. She was in her late 30s with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue. You're too thin, Lucia said, walking around Franca like a predator circling prey. We need something that gives you shape. And your posture is terrible. You stand like a waitress. You need to stand like someone who has power. They tried on 12 dresses. Most of them made Franca look like she was playing dress-up in her mother's closet. Too big, too flashy, too obviously expensive in a way that screamed, I don't belong here. Then the boutique owner brought out a dress in deep emerald green silk. It was simpler than the others, with clean lines and long sleeves. When Franca put it on, something shifted. She looked elegant, professional, like someone who could walk into a room full of dangerous people and hold her own. That's the one, Lucia said with satisfaction. Now for shoes and jewelry. The shoes were black heels that hurt Franca's feet after 10 minutes. The jewelry was minimal, just simple gold earrings and a delicate gold necklace. But Lucia insisted on one more thing. You'll wear your silver wristwatch, she said. The one you always have on. It's simple and practical. It says you're there to work, not to party. Franca touched the watch her father had given her for her 16th birthday. She never took it off. Won't it look cheap compared to everything else? It looks real, Lucia corrected. In a room full of people wearing fake smiles and false loyalty, real is valuable. The gala was held in a converted opera house in Milan, a building so beautiful it made Franca's chest hurt. The walls were covered in gold decorations and paintings of angels. Crystal lights the size of cars hung from the ceiling. The marble floor was so polished she could see her reflection in it. Franca walked in beside Nino, who wore a perfectly tailored dark suit and looked like he had been born for events like this. Marco walked behind them with 2 bodyguards, his face set in a permanent scowl. He had made his opinion very clear during the car ride up. Bringing Franca to this event was a mistake. She would embarrass them. She would say something stupid. She would prove she was just a waitress playing pretend. The main hall was filled with at least 200 people, all of them dressed in expensive clothes and fake jewelry. Well, probably not all fake. Some of it was definitely real. Franca saw one woman wearing a diamond necklace that could probably pay for her mother's treatment 3 times over. "Stay close," Nino said quietly. "Watch everyone, especially Marco." "Marco?" Franca repeated, confused. "Why Marco?" "Because I think he's planning something," Nino said. "He's been too quiet lately, too cooperative. When Marco stops fighting me, it means he's scheming." Before Franca could ask more questions, people started approaching Nino to shake hands and exchange pleasantries that sounded friendly but felt like threats wrapped in silk. Franca stood slightly behind him and to the left, exactly where Lucia had told her to stand. Close enough to be included, but far enough to be dismissed. She watched faces. She watched body language. She noticed who avoided eye contact with Nino and who held it too long. She saw a man in a gray suit whisper something to his companion while looking at Nino. Then both of them laughed. Not a friendly laugh. After an hour of mingling, dinner was announced. Everyone filed into a massive dining hall with round tables covered in white cloth. Franca sat at Nino's table along with Marco, 2 other senior members of the Lombardi family, and 3 people from a neutral family called the Ferraro group. The food was incredible, course after course of dishes Franca couldn't even name. But she barely tasted any of it. She was too busy watching Marco. He kept checking his phone under the table. Quick glances, trying to be subtle but failing. He was waiting for something. Halfway through the main course, Marco's phone buzzed. He looked at it, then stood up abruptly. "Excuse me," he said to the table. "I need to make a call." He walked out of the dining hall toward the bathrooms. Franca waited 30 seconds, then leaned close to Nino. "I need to use the bathroom," she whispered. Nino's eyes flicked toward the door Marco had just exited. He understood immediately. "Be careful," he said quietly. Franca stood and walked out of the dining hall, her heart pounding. She had no plan. She just knew something was wrong. The hallway outside the dining hall was quieter, but still had people wandering around. Franca followed the signs toward the bathrooms, her heels clicking on the marble floor. She turned a corner and saw Marco standing near a service entrance, talking to someone. The someone was Dante Caruso, head of the Caruso family. The Caruso family was one of the 5 rivals who wanted to take over Lombardy territory. Seeing Marco talking to him was like seeing a defense lawyer having coffee with the prosecutor during a trial. Franca ducked into a small alcove behind a statue. She couldn't hear what they were saying from this distance, but she could see them clearly. Marco was gesturing with his hands, explaining something. Dante was nodding and smiling. Then Franca remembered her father's watch. It wasn't just a watch. He had modified it years ago, adding a small recording device because he liked to record his thoughts about clock designs. The recording quality was terrible, but if she could get close enough, it might pick up their conversation. She took a deep breath and walked past them as naturally as she could, pretending to be lost. She stopped about 10 feet away and pretended to check something on the watch, holding it near her face. The tiny microphone was facing their direction. 3 weeks from now, Marco was saying, the shipment arrives at midnight. Dock 12. Your people can intercept it there. Just make sure it looks like an outside job. Pirates, smugglers, whatever. And you'll get your cut as agreed, Dante replied. 20% of everything we take. 30%, Marco corrected. That was the deal. Fine, 30. But if this goes wrong, if Nino suspects anything, he won't, Marco said confidently. He trusts me. I've been with him for 15 years. And that stupid girl he's been parading around? She's a joke, a distraction. She doesn't know anything about real operations. Franca felt her face burn with anger, but she forced herself to stay calm. She pressed a button on the side of the watch, stopping the recording. Then she turned and walked quickly back toward the dining hall. Her mind was racing. Marco wasn't just skimming money anymore. He was actively betraying Nino, setting up a shipment to be stolen by a rival family. This wasn't theft. This was treason. The kind of treason that could start a war between families. She slipped back in her seat at the table, just as dessert was being served. Nino raised an eyebrow at her, a silent question. Later, she mouthed. Marco returned 5 minutes later, looking relaxed and satisfied. He made small talk with the Ferraro representatives like nothing had happened. He even laughed at a joke one of them made. Franca wanted to scream at him. She wanted to jump across the table and tell everyone what he was planning. But Lucia's words echoed in her mind. In a room full of people wearing fake smiles and false loyalty, real is valuable. She needed proof. She needed evidence. Lucky for her, she had both sitting on her wrist. The rest of the dinner passed in agonizing slowness. Finally, after speeches and toasts and endless posturing, the event ended. People started filing out toward their cars. In a limousine back to Naples, Marco sat in the front with the driver. Nino sat in the back with Franca. As soon as the privacy screen went up between the front and back seats, Franca pulled off her watch and handed it to Nino. Press the small button on the left side, she whispered. Listen to the last recording. Nino took the watch and pressed the button. His face showed no emotion as he listened to Marco's betrayal. But Franca could see his jaw tighten. His hand went to his gold ring, twisting it slowly. When the recording ended, he handed the watch back to her without saying a word. He looked out the window at the dark highway rushing past. After 5 full minutes of silence, he finally spoke. "You just saved my life," he said quietly. "Again, what are you going to do?" Franca asked. Nino's expression was cold and hard as stone. "I'm going to let Marco think his plan is working. Then I'm going to show him what happens when you betray the Lombardi family." He turned to look at her, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something that might have been actual warmth in his eyes. "You're not a joke or distraction, Franca. You're the best decision I've made in 10 years. Franca looked down at her silver watch, still warm from Nino's hand. Her father had built this watch to record his thoughts about gears and mechanisms. He never could have imagined it would one day record a confession that would save a crime boss's empire. But then again, her father had always said the most valuable tools were the ones nobody expected. Nino didn't move against Marco immediately. That surprised Franca. She thought he would confront his underboss the moment they returned to Naples, maybe even during the car ride home. But instead, Nino acted like nothing had changed. He included Marco in meetings. He asked for his opinions. He smiled and joked with him like they were still brothers in arms. "You're letting him think he's safe," Franca said 2 days after the Milan Gala. They were in Nino's private office at the Palazzo, a room with thick walls and no windows. "You're setting a trap." "I'm letting him dig his own grave," Nino corrected. He was standing at his desk, looking at surveillance photos of Dock 12 where Marco's betrayal was supposed to happen. "If I confront him now, he'll deny everything. He'll say the recording is fake. He'll turn some of the men against me by claiming I'm paranoid. But if I catch him in the act, with Caruso's people actually stealing my shipment, then everyone will see what he really is." "What if something goes wrong?" Franca asked. "What if he realizes you know? Then I'll deal with it." Nino looked at her with those dark, calculating eyes. "But I don't think he will. Marco thinks he's smarter than everyone else. That's his weakness. He can't imagine that a waitress figured out what he spent months planning." Franca wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. Marco's arrogance was his blind spot. He had dismissed her from the moment she opened the vault, and he would keep dismissing her until it was too late. The next few days passed in tense normalcy. Franca continued her work analyzing financial records and supply routes. She found a pattern in the gambling operations that suggested one of the casino managers was skimming profits. She identified a restaurant that was being used to launder money by a crew that wasn't paying proper tribute to the Lombardi family. She was getting good at this job, better than she ever expected. But the whole time, she felt like she was waiting for an explosion that could happen any second. Then came the dinner invitation. "The Ferraro family wants to discuss a partnership," Nino told her on Thursday morning. "They're hosting a private dinner tomorrow night at their estate outside Naples. Just 5 people from each side. It's supposed to be a peace offering, a way to strengthen alliances before the Caruso family tries to expand into our territory." "Is it safe?" Franca asked. "Probably not," Nino admitted. "But refusing would be an insult. It would make us look weak or afraid. So we're going. Who else is coming?" Me, you, Marco, and two of my senior captains. Luca will drive us, but he stays with the car. The Ferraro family has rules about armed guards at dinner. It's supposed to be civilized. He said that last word like it tasted bad in his mouth. Franca spent Friday afternoon preparing the way she always did before important events. She researched the Ferraro family, learning everything she could about their history and current operations. They controlled most of the construction industry in the Naples region. They were known for being traditional, old-fashioned, and extremely careful about honor and respect. They had been neutral in most conflicts between the other families, which made them valuable allies. But Franca's instincts were screaming that something was wrong. The timing was too convenient. Marco was planning his betrayal, and suddenly the Ferraro family wanted to have dinner. It felt like pieces moving on a chessboard, but she couldn't see the full pattern yet. The Ferraro estate was massive, sitting on a hill overlooking the bay. The main house looked like a castle, all stone walls and towers with lights illuminating it from below. Armed guards checked them at the gate, politely but thoroughly. No weapons allowed, as promised. Inside, the dining room was formal and old-fashioned. A long wooden table was set with crystal glasses and silver plates. Paintings of stern-looking ancestors hung on the walls, watching the proceedings like judges. Paolo Ferraro, the family head, greeted them warmly. He was in his 60s with white hair and the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. His two sons flanked him, both younger than Nino, but trying hard to look intimidating. A daughter-in-law completed their group of 5, a quiet woman in a black dress who barely spoke. "Welcome, welcome," Paolo said, shaking Nino's hand. "Thank you for accepting our invitation. Please sit. We have much to discuss." The seating arrangement put Nino at the head of the table on one side, with Franca to his right and Marco to his left. The two captains sat further down. The Ferraro family took the other end, mirroring the arrangement. Servants began bringing out food. First, a salad with fresh vegetables and olive oil. Then soup, rich and creamy. Then pasta with some kind of seafood sauce that smelled incredible. Franca barely ate any of it. She was too busy watching everyone's faces, looking for signs of deception. Marco was performing perfectly. He laughed at Paolo's jokes. He complimented the food. He acted like a loyal underboss who had no secrets. Franca wanted to throw her soup at him. "We're concerned about the Caruso family," Paolo said during the pasta course. "They've been making aggressive moves lately, trying to buy properties in territories that don't belong to them, pressuring business owners to switch loyalties. We think they're planning something big." "We've noticed the same thing," Nino said carefully, "which is why we appreciate allies who value stability." "Exactly." Paolo smiled and raised his wine glass. "To stability, to old friendships, to mutual prosperity." Everyone raised their glasses. Servants circulated around the table, pouring wine from crystal bottles. The wine was deep red, almost purple. It caught the light from the chandelier and sparkled. Franca watched as a servant poured wine into Nino's glass. Then she noticed something that made her freeze. The servant's hand was shaking just slightly as he poured. And when he stepped back, he exchanged a quick glance with Paolo. A glance that lasted less than a second, but spoke volumes. Franca's mind started racing. Her father had taught her about chemistry, about how different substances reacted with each other. He had shown her how certain compounds could be deadly in small amounts, tasteless and nearly invisible in liquid. He had warned her that poison was a coward's weapon, but an effective one. She looked at her own wine glass, then at Nino's. The color was the same. The clarity was the same. But something felt wrong. Then she noticed the sediment at the bottom of Nino's glass, so fine it was almost invisible. A slight graininess that caught the light differently than pure wine would. The other glasses, including her own, were perfectly clear. Nino was lifting his glass to his lips. "Wait," Franca said, loud enough to make everyone stop and stare at her. Nino paused with the glass halfway to his mouth. "What's wrong?" Franca's heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. She could be wrong. She could be paranoid. She could be about to humiliate herself and insult their hosts over nothing. But if she was right and said nothing, Nino would die in the next 30 seconds. I think there's something wrong with your wine, she said, keeping her voice steady even though her hands were shaking under the table. The room went completely silent. Paolo's smile disappeared. Marco's eyes widened. The two captains reached for weapons they weren't carrying. That's a serious accusation, Paolo said, his voice dropping from friendly to dangerous. Are you suggesting I would poison a guest in my own home? I'm suggesting someone did, Franca replied. She stood up and walked to Nino's glass. May I? Nino set the glass down and nodded, his face unreadable. Franca picked up the glass and held it to the light. Look at the bottom. There's sediment. Fine particles that shouldn't be there in properly aged wine. It's settling at the bottom because it's heavier than the liquid around it. She carried the glass to a plant in the corner of the room, a decorative olive tree in a ceramic pot. She poured a small amount of wine onto the soil. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the leaves of the plant started to curl and turn brown, dying in real time. The room exploded with noise. Marco jumped to his feet. The Ferraro sons reached for something inside their jackets. Nino stood slowly, his face carved from ice. Ricin, Franca said, her voice cutting through the chaos. Mixed with a binding agent to keep it suspended in the wine. My father taught me about plant-based poisons when I was young. He said ricin kills slowly, painfully, and there's no antidote. Someone ground up castor beans and dissolved them in this wine. Paolo's face had gone pale. I swear to you, Nino, I knew nothing about this. This was not my doing. Then whose doing was it? Nino's voice was quiet, but more dangerous than shouting would have been. Everyone looked at the servant who had poured Nino's wine. He was backing toward the door, his face white with terror. Stop him, Nino said. The Ferraro sons moved faster than Franca expected. They grabbed the servant before he could reach the exit. He struggled, but they held him easily. Who paid you? Paolo demanded, walking toward the servant. Who put you up to this? The servant looked at Marco. Just for a second, his eyes flicked toward the underboss before he caught himself and looked away. But everyone had seen it. Marco's face went through several emotions in rapid succession. Surprise, fear, calculation, and finally resignation. He had been caught. The betrayal Franca had recorded in Milan was now connected to an attempted assassination. There was no talking his way out of this. I'm sorry it came to this, Marco said, looking at Nino. But you're getting weak. That girl, your advisor, she's making you soft. The family needs strong leadership, not someone who listens to a waitress. She just saved my life, Nino said quietly, which is more than you've done in 15 years. He turned to Paolo. I believe you had no knowledge of this, but your man tried to kill me in your house. That requires a response. Paolo nodded, his face grim. Agreed. He's yours to question. And Marco? He looked at the underboss with disgust. Get him out of my house. Whatever happens to him happens away from here. I won't have traitor's blood on my floors. Nino's two captains grabbed Marco, one on each arm. Marco didn't struggle. He knew it was over. As they dragged him toward the door, Marco looked at Franco one last time. You really are just a waitress playing games you don't understand, he said. You think you're safe because you're useful? The moment you stop being useful, you're dead. Maybe, Franca replied, but I'll still be alive tomorrow. Will you? Marco had no answer for that. They took him away, along with the servant who had delivered the poison. The dinner ended shortly after that. Nobody had an appetite anymore. Nino and Franca rode back to Naples in silence, both of them processing what had just happened. Finally, Nino spoke. How did you know? The sediment, Franca said, and the servant's hand shaking, and the way Paolo looked at him. Small details that didn't fit the pattern. My father used to say that poison is betrayed by its weight. It never mixes perfectly. There's always evidence if you know where to look. Your father taught you well, Nino said. He reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently. You've saved my life twice now. Once with your mind and once with your eyes. I'm starting to think I couldn't survive without you. Franca looked at their joined hands. A few months ago, she had been invisible. Nobody had seen her. Nobody had valued her. Now she was sitting in a limousine holding hands with one of the most dangerous men in Italy, and he was telling her she was essential to his survival. Her father had been right about patterns. They appeared when you least expected them, and sometimes They led you to places you never imagined you'd go. What will happen to Marco? She asked quietly. Nothing good, Nino said. But that's not your concern. Your concern is staying alive and staying sharp. Because after tonight, every rival family knows you're my greatest asset. That makes you a target. Franca had known this moment would come eventually. The moment when being valuable became dangerous. But she had made her choice the night she opened the vault. There was no going back now. Then I'll be ready, she said. Nino smiled, a real smile that transformed his face. I believe you will. The fallout from Marco's betrayal came faster than anyone expected. Within 2 days, word spread through Naples like wildfire. Marco Tosetti, underboss of the Lombardi family for 15 years, had tried to poison his own boss and gotten caught. The servant who delivered the poison had disappeared, probably dumped in the bay with concrete tied to his ankles. Marco himself was being held in a warehouse on the edge of the city, awaiting judgment from the Council of Five. But the damage was already done. Marco had loyalists within the organization, men who had worked under him for years and owed him favors. Some of them believed Marco's version of events, that Nino was being manipulated by Franca, that the family was getting weak under Nino's leadership, that change was needed. Franca could feel the tension in every meeting she attended. The men who used to ignore her now watched her with hostile eyes. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Twice, she found threatening notes slipped under her apartment door. One said, "Waitresses should know their place." The other was more direct. "You'll die screaming." Nino doubled her security. She now had 2 bodyguards who followed her everywhere, even to the bathroom. Their names were Enzo and Stefano, both quiet men in their 30s who spoke maybe 10 words per day combined. Franca found their constant presence both comforting and suffocating. Marco's supporters are planning something. Nino told her 5 days after the poisoning incident. They were in his private office at the Palazzo, reviewing financial reports. My sources say they're meeting in secret, planning a response, maybe even a coup. A coup? Franca set down the papers she was reading. You mean they want to overthrow you? They want to kill me, Nino corrected. Then install someone they can control. Probably Dante Caruso. He'd be happy to absorb what's left of my organization after the rebels tear it apart from the inside. So what do? We wait for them to make their move. Then we crush them. Nino's voice was cold. But I need to know where and when they'll strike. That's where you come in. Over the next 3 days, Franca analyzed movement patterns throughout the Palazzo and the other Lombardi properties. She tracked which men were arriving late to meetings, who was making unusual phone calls, whose spending had suddenly increased. She created a network map showing relationships between Marco's known loyalists and others who might be sympathetic to their cause. The pattern that emerged was disturbing. At least 15 men, maybe 20, were actively working against Nino. That was almost a third of his inner circle. If they all moved together, with coordination and surprise, they could potentially succeed in taking him down. But something else bothered Franca. Something about the Palazzo itself. She had been working there for 2 months now, walking its halls every day. She had noticed things that didn't quite make sense. Doors that led to nowhere. Staircases that ended at blank walls. Rooms that seemed too small for the space they occupied on the building's blueprint. One afternoon, while everyone else was at lunch, Franca went down to the basement archives where old construction documents were stored. She found the original blueprints for the Palazzo, drawn up in 1892 when the building was first constructed. Then she found renovation plans from 1947, 1968, and 1993. As she compared the different versions, something became clear. The building had a fatal flaw. The 1947 renovation had added a new wing to the east side of the Palazzo. But the architect had made a mistake. He had built the addition on top of old cistern tunnels without properly reinforcing them. The tunnels, which had once carried water throughout the property, were still there beneath the new construction. They were empty now, sealed off and forgotten, but they created hollow spaces under critical load-bearing walls. Franca's father had taught her about structural engineering when she was young. He had explained how buildings distributed weight, how forces traveled through walls and columns, how everything needed to be balanced or the structure would fail. Looking at these blueprints, she could see that the East Wing was unstable. Not dangerously unstable under normal conditions, but vulnerable if the right pressure points were compromised. The East Wing was where the main conference room was located, the room where Nino held his most important meetings, the room where he would likely be when Marco's loyalists made their move. Franca's hands started shaking as she realized what the rebels were planning. They weren't just going to attack Nino. They were going to collapse the building on top of him. She ran upstairs with the blueprints, her two bodyguards struggling to keep up. She burst into Nino's office without knocking. The building, she gasped out of breath. The East Wing. It's built on empty tunnels. If someone knows where to place explosives or apply enough force to the right walls, they could bring down the entire conference room. Nino took the blueprints and studied them carefully. His face didn't change expression, but Franca had learned to read the subtle signs. The way his jaw tightened, the way his hand went to his gold ring. He understood immediately. When? He asked. Tomorrow, Franca said. She had pieced it together from a schedule. The monthly strategy meeting. All the senior captains will be there. If the rebels want maximum impact, that's when they'll strike. So we cancel the meeting, Nino said. That tells them we know, Franca countered. They'll scatter and try again later. We need to catch them in the act, with evidence that can't be denied. Nino looked at her with those calculating eyes. You have a plan? I have the beginning of one. Franca spread the blueprints across his desk. The tunnels under the East Wing are accessible from 3 points. Here, here, and here. She pointed to locations on the map. If someone wanted to place explosives, they need to enter through one of these access points. We could set up surveillance, catch them preparing their attack. And then we turn their plan against them. Franca's mind was racing now, seeing patterns and possibilities. We let them think they're succeeding. We evacuate the conference room secretly before the meeting starts. We fill it with loyal men dressed like captains. When the rebels trigger their trap, they'll trap themselves instead. Nino stared at her for a long moment. Then he started laughing, a genuine laugh that echoed through the office. You want to use the building's weakness as a weapon. You want to make them blow themselves up. Not blow up, Franca corrected. We can't actually collapse the building. Too many innocent people work here. But we can make them think they're succeeding while we surround them. Cut off their escape routes. Force them to surrender or fight in a place where they have no advantage. It's risky, Nino said. Everything is risky now. He nodded slowly. Then we do it. But you're not staying in the palazzo during the operation. It's too dangerous. I need to be here, Franca argued. I'm the only one who understands the building's structure well enough to know if something goes wrong. Franca, you brought me here because I see patterns you don't see, she said firmly. Trust me to do my job. Nino studied her face, and something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or something deeper that neither of them was ready to name yet. Fine, he said, but you stay in a secure location with guards. And if I give a signal to evacuate, you leave immediately. No arguments. Deal. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Nino's most loyal men were briefed on the plan. Surveillance cameras were secretly installed near the 3 tunnel access points. The conference room was subtly equipped with hidden exits that could be opened from the outside. Everything that could be done to tip the odds in their favor was done. The next morning arrived gray and cold, with rain threatening. Franca dressed in practical clothes, black pants, and a simple shirt, nothing that would slow her down if she needed to run. She checked her silver watch, a habit that had become almost superstitious. The watch had saved Nino once. Maybe it would bring luck again. The strategy meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock. At 9:30, Franca was positioned in a secured office on the west wing with Enzo and Stefano standing guard outside. She had a laptop connected to the surveillance cameras and a radio to communicate with Nino. At 9:45, movement appeared on one of the camera feeds. 3 men entered the tunnel system through the northern access point, carrying heavy bags. Franca recognized one of them as Giovanni Russo, a captain who had worked under Marco for 8 years. They're inside, she said into the radio. Northern tunnel. 3 men. They're carrying something heavy. Copy that. Nino's voice came back. Stand by. Franca watched the screen as the men moved through the tunnels beneath the East Wing. They seemed to know exactly where they were going, which confirmed her suspicion that someone had given them the building's blueprints. They stopped at a location directly under the main support column for the conference room. One of them opened his bag and pulled out what looked like blocks of clay wrapped in plastic. Explosives, enough to bring down the entire wing if placed correctly. They're setting charges, Franca reported, under the main column. If they detonate, the whole East Wing comes down. How long until they're ready? Nino asked. Franca watched as they worked, attaching detonators and running wires. Maybe 10 minutes. They're being careful, making sure everything's connected properly. Good. That gives us time. At exactly 10 o'clock, the fake strategy meeting began upstairs. Loyal men disguised as senior captains filed into the conference room and sat around the table, talking about nothing important. To anyone watching, it looked exactly like a normal meeting. In the tunnels below, the rebels finished their preparations. They connected a final wire to a small electronic device, probably a remote detonator. Then they started moving back toward the exit. They're leaving, Franca said. They'll probably trigger it from outside the building once they're clear. Not if we close the exits first, Nino replied. Franca heard shouting through the radio, then gunfire. On her camera feeds, she saw Nino's men moving into position at all 3 tunnel access points. The rebels in the tunnels heard the commotion and started running, realizing too late that they were trapped. More gunfire echoed through the building, muffled by distance and walls, but still audible. Franca's heart was pounding. This was it, the moment when everything either worked or fell apart. They're surrendering, Nino's voice came through the radio. We've got Giovanni and his 2 men. They're searching them for the detonator now. Franca watched her screens as Nino's men pulled weapons and the remote detonator from the rebels. The device was small, black, with a simple red button. One press would have killed dozens of people and destroyed a building that had stood for over a century. What about the others? Franca asked. Giovanni had at least 15 supporters. Already being rounded up, Nino said. We had teams watching all of Marco's known loyalists. The moment the explosion didn't happen, they tried to run. We're picking them up now. Relief flooded through Franca so strongly she felt dizzy. It had worked. The plan had actually worked. They had turned the rebels' trap into a trap of their own. An hour later, Nino came to her secured office. He looked tired but satisfied. It's over. We caught 12 rebels total. The rest are running or hiding, but they're finished. Without leadership and without numbers, they're just criminals now, not a threat. And Marco? The Council of 5 issued their judgment an hour ago. He's dead. They don't tolerate traitors. Franca should have felt something about that. Marco had tried to kill Nino twice, had insulted her repeatedly, had nearly destroyed everything. But all she felt was numbness. This was the world she lived in now. The world where betrayal meant death, where loyalty was enforced with violence, where being smart enough and fast enough was the difference between survival and ending up in a bay. You did well today, Nino said, sitting across from her. You saw a weakness and turned it into a strength. That's rare. Most people only see problems. You see solutions. I learned from my father, Franca said. He always said every flaw is also an opportunity if you look at it right. He was a wise man. Nino reached across and took her hand, the same gesture he had made in the car after the poisoning. This organization would have collapsed without you. You know that, right? The vault, the shipping manifests, the poison wine, and now this. You saved us 4 times in 2 months. I was just doing my job. No, Nino said, his voice serious. You were doing more than that. You were thinking 3 steps ahead of everyone else. You were seeing patterns that nobody else could see. That's not just a job, Franca. That's a gift. He squeezed her hand gently. I want you to know something. You're not my employee anymore. You're not my advisor. You're my partner. Equal in everything. What's mine is yours. Where I go, you go. What I decide, we decide together. Franca stared at him, not quite believing what she was hearing. Partner, Nino confirmed. Unless you don't want that. Did she want it? Did she want to fully commit to this life of danger and violence and constant calculation? Did she want to tie herself to a man who solved problems with guns and intimidation? But then she thought about her mother in Switzerland getting better every day thanks to the treatment Nino had paid for. She thought about the apartment she now lived in, safe and comfortable. She thought about how it felt to use her mind for something important, something that mattered, instead of carrying trays and being invisible. "I want it," she said. Nino smiled and pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in a hug that felt like a promise. "Then welcome to the top, Franca Beneveni. The view is dangerous, but it's beautiful." Franca closed her eyes and let herself enjoy the moment. She was no longer the invisible waitress drowning in debt. She was no longer the desperate daughter watching her mother fade away. She was the architect of the underworld, the woman who saw patterns in chaos, the partner of one of Italy's most powerful men. Her father would be proud, or horrified, maybe both. 3 months passed like water flowing downhill, fast and unstoppable. The rebellion was crushed completely. The men who had supported Marco either pledged loyalty to Nino or disappeared into the night, never to be heard from again. The Caruso family, seeing their plan had failed, backed away from Lombardy territory and focused on other opportunities. The Council of Five officially recognized Franca as Nino's partner, making her the first woman in 50 years to hold real power in the Naples underworld. The change in how people treated her was dramatic. Men who used to ignore her now asked for her opinion. Captains who used to smirk when she entered a room now stood when she arrived. Even Paolo Ferraro, who had nearly hosted Nino's assassination, sent her a gift. An antique compass from the 1800s with a note that said, "For the woman who always knows which direction to go." But the biggest change was in Switzerland. Franca's mother had been in treatment for 3 months now, and the results were beyond anything the doctors had predicted. Sophia was remembering things. Not just recent events, but memories from Franca's childhood that had been lost for years. Last week, during their video call, Sophia had asked about Franca's father's favorite clock, the one with the wooden case shaped like a ship. She described it perfectly, down to the tiny anchor carved into the base. That memory had been gone for 2 years. "The treatment is working better than we hoped," Dr. Mueller told Franca during a private consultation. "Your mother's cognitive function has improved by almost 40%. She's not cured, but she's stable and improving. At this rate, she could potentially return home within 6 months." Franca had cried after that call. Not sad tears, but the kind of tears that come from relief, so strong it feels like physical weight being lifted off your shoulders. She had saved her mother, against impossible odds, with choices that had taken her into darkness. She had actually saved her mother. "Good news?" Nino had asked, finding her in his office with tears still wet on her face. "The best news," Franca had replied, and then she had kissed him. It wasn't their first kiss. That had happened 2 weeks after the rebellion, late at night in the palazzo, after everyone else had gone home. But this kiss was different. It wasn't born from danger or adrenaline or the relief of surviving another threat. It was born from genuine happiness, from gratitude, from something deeper that neither of them had quite put into words yet. Now, standing on the balcony of Nino's private villa on the Amalfi Coast, Franca let herself enjoy the view without constantly calculating threats or analyzing patterns. The sun was setting over the Mediterranean, turning the water into liquid gold. Franca admitted honestly, "I help you trap men who probably have families. I watch people disappear because of information I provided. I'm part of a world that runs on violence and fear. That's not who I thought I would be." Nino was quiet for a moment, looking out at the water. "Do you want to leave?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Franca had thought about it, especially late at night when she couldn't sleep. She had enough money now to walk away. Her mother was being cared for. She could disappear, start over somewhere else, become invisible again. "No," she said finally. "I don't want to leave, but I want to change what we're doing. Make it less about violence and more about strategy. Less about fear and more about intelligence. And you think that's possible? In this world, I think we can try." Franca turned to face him. "You brought me in because I see things differently. So let me see things differently about the whole operation. We don't need to threaten everyone. We don't need to solve every problem with guns. We can be smarter than that. Nino studied her face with those dark, calculating eyes that had once terrified her, but now felt familiar. You want to reform the Mafia. I want to evolve it, Franca corrected. Make it sustainable. Make it last. Right now, everything depends on fear and force. But fear fades. Force creates enemies. What if we build something based on value instead? Become so useful to businesses and politicians that they choose to work with us instead of being forced to. That's ambitious. Everything about us is ambitious, Franca said with a slight smile. You gave a waitress power. I opened an impossible vault in 60 seconds. We've survived 2 assassination attempts and a rebellion. Why not aim higher? Nino laughed. That genuine laugh she had heard only a handful of times. He set down his wine glass and took both of her hands in his. You know what I love about you? You look at an empire built on blood and see potential for something better. Most people would just enjoy the power. You want to transform it. Is that crazy? Probably, Nino said. But I didn't fall in love with you because you were reasonable. The words hung between them, more powerful than any declaration made with flowers or music. This wasn't a romantic moment stolen from a movie. This was real. 2 people who had found each other in darkness and decided to build something together, whatever that might look like. You love me? Franca asked, her voice soft. I think I started loving you the moment you looked at an impossible vault and saw a map, Nino replied. Maybe even before that, when you knelt in broken glass and didn't run away when I threatened you. You could have stayed silent, stayed safe, but you spoke up because you saw something nobody else did. That courage, that intelligence, that refusal to be invisible anymore. How could I not love that? Franca felt tears forming, but she didn't try to hide them. I love you too. Even though you're complicated and dangerous and part of a world I never imagined being part of. We're both complicated, Nino said. But maybe that's why it works. He pulled a small box from his pocket. Franca's heart skipped a beat. The box was old, made of dark leather that had been worn smooth by time. Nino opened it to reveal a ring unlike anything Franca had seen in jewelry stores. It was simple silver with a single blue stone set in the center, surrounded by tiny engravings. This ring belonged to my grandmother, Nino said. She was the smartest person in our family, smarter than any of the men. She ran the household accounts, managed investments, and advised my grandfather on every major decision. When she died, she left this ring to be given to someone worthy of carrying on her legacy. Someone who used their mind to build instead of destroy. He took the ring from the box and held it up to the fading light. The blue stone caught the last rays of sun and sparkled like the sea below them. Franca Beneveni, will you be my partner in everything? Not just business, but life? Will you help me build something better than what came before? Franca looked at the ring, then at Nino, then out at the vast Mediterranean stretching to the horizon. 4 months ago, she had been drowning in debt and desperation. She had been invisible, forgettable, someone the world used and ignored. Now she stood on a balcony overlooking the Amalfi Coast, being proposed to by a man who had given her power, purpose, and the chance to save her mother. She had become someone who solved impossible problems, who saw patterns in chaos, who had turned her gift for observation into genuine influence. The waitress was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, smarter, more capable than Franca had ever imagined she could be. Yes, she said. Yes to all of it. Nino slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. Then he kissed her as the sun finally dropped below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Behind them, through the open doors of the villa, Franca could hear her phone buzzing with messages. Probably business that needed attention, problems that needed solving, patterns that needed analyzing. Her new life was demanding and dangerous and nothing like what she had planned. But it was hers. She had earned it with intelligence and courage. She had saved her mother, found love, and discovered that being invisible had been the biggest waste of her potential. Now she was visible. Now she mattered. Now she was building something that could last. What happens now? She asked, her head resting against Nino's chest as they stood together watching the stars emerge. "Now we change the rules," Nino said. "Together." "Together," Franca agreed. In the pocket of her jacket, her father's silver watch ticked steadily, counting seconds into minutes, minutes into hours. Time kept moving forward, indifferent to plans or dreams or the transformation of invisible waitresses into queens of empires built in shadow. But Franca had learned something important over the past 4 months. Time might be indifferent, but people weren't. Choices mattered. Courage mattered. Seeing patterns that others missed mattered. And love, surprisingly, mattered most of all. The Mediterranean breeze carried the scent of lemons and salt water. Somewhere below, waves crashed against ancient rocks. Above, stars arranged themselves in patterns that sailors had used for navigation since before recorded history. Franca looked up at those stars and smiled. She had used them once to open a vault. Maybe she could use them again to navigate this new life she was building. Not alone this time, but with someone who saw her value and helped her see it in herself. The waitress was gone. The queen had arrived, and her reign was just beginning.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.